Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Loved by the Hitman by Fiona Davenport. Narrated by Jack Callahan and Tieran Wilder. Prologue. Merrick. I stared through the scope on my rifle, lining it up with my target. The rooftop I was perched on had the perfect cover, so I was well hidden. It had taken a couple of months to find the bastard who'd betrayed my SEAL team, but I finally had him in my sights. Taking this guy out was the only option. Otherwise, he'd find some way to tamper with the evidence of his traitorous activities, and we'd probably end up in front of a firing squad, a method most people didn't realize was still in use. The son of a bitch deserved no better, but this wasn't a sanctioned mission. He would only be on the receiving end of a single bullet to the head. I knew this would effectively end my military career, but if I didn't do it, one of my brothers would. I was the only one without family, and my soul had already been blackened enough. Besides, I'd been recruited for a new job with Ruthless Corp. As soon as I completed this mission, I would leave the Navy with honors and start my life in Los Angeles as a professional hitman. Had to put my sniper skills to use somehow, and as long as the owner, Rogue, gave me targets that deserved their fate, I had no crisis of conscience over my employment. My heartbeat was calm and slow, my steady breaths in sync with the rhythm. Finally, Vic turned in my direction, and I took the shot. His body froze for a second before crumpling to the ground. A few drops of blood leaked from the small, precise hole directly between his eyes. Calmly, but quickly, I began to pack up my equipment. I didn't give Vic another thought. He wasn't my first kill, and he certainly wouldn't be my last. Once I'd rid the rooftop of every speck of evidence, my skills as a cleaner were another reason I'd been recruited by Ruthless Corp. I slipped into the building and made my way down the stairs. I exited the back and hoofed it the 10 blocks to my truck. As I pulled onto the highway, I dialed the number for my lieutenant, Huntley. When the call connected, I skipped the greetings and growled, "It's done." I was met with a few minutes of silence. Then Huntley sighed, his relief palpable through the phone. "We owe you, Shadow," he grunted. "It was all our asses on the line, Huntley, but especially those of you with family. None of you owe me a fucking thing. This was my decision, and I don't regret it." "Hoo-yah, sailor," he said in a low tone. "Hoo-yah, Lieutenant," I echoed. We hung up without another word, and I focused on the road, traveling to L.A. and my new life.
Chapter 1. Audrey. After blindly slapping my palm against my cell phone screen to hit snooze on my alarm for the 3rd time, I slowly blinked my eyes open. Between my duties as a bridesmaid for my best friend Grace's 2nd wedding, to a guy she was already married to, which was quite the story, and a test in my Western Civ class this morning, I hadn't gotten much sleep over the past week. Not that Grace was a bridezilla or anything, but she had her hands full being a mom to their adorable twins, Kate and Joshua, so I'd been trying to pitch in wherever I could to help lighten her load. But burning the candle at both ends was catching up with me, and I really could have used another hour of sleep. No such luck, I grumbled as I switched off the alarm. After rolling off my mattress, I stretched my arms high and groaned in relief at the pop in my lower back. I wanted to grab a shower and wash my hair before heading to the library for some last-minute studying. Since I only had a couple of hours until my class started, I couldn't ignore my alarm any longer. Luckily, I had my own shower in my dorm room this year and didn't need to worry about the bathroom being crowded with other girls. When I finished blow-drying my hair and brushing some powder over my face to cover my freckles about 40 minutes later, I felt a little more human. After tossing on a pair of yoga pants, a t-shirt, and a sweatshirt, I slipped a pair of Toms on my feet and applied my favorite gloss to my lips. Then I wandered over to my single-serve coffee maker and popped a chocolate marshmallow swirl pod into the slot, placed my insulated travel tumbler under the spout, and pressed the button to brew the largest cup possible. Once my drink was prepared exactly how I liked it, with lots of cream and sugar, I grabbed my backpack and headed for the door, finally ready to tackle my day. No one was in the hallway as I left my room, but I spotted movement to my left after I locked the door. There was only one room past mine in that direction, and my neighbor had been missing for more than 2 weeks. I was filled with hope that she'd finally returned safe and sound. But my excitement was short-lived when I looked over my shoulder and saw a stranger coming out of Stacy's room. The guy definitely didn't belong in the dorm. I pegged him for about a decade older than me, too young to be a parent and too old to be a student. He also wasn't the kind of man who would blend into the background. With his dark hair, scruffy beard, aviator sunglasses, tall, muscular body, leather jacket, and animalistic prowl, he was guaranteed to draw the attention of every woman whose path he crossed. My breath stalled in my lungs when he glanced toward me as he shut Stacy's door behind him. I couldn't tell what was going on behind the darkened lenses covering his eyes, but I had the sneaking suspicion he was checking me out as closely as I had done with him. A shiver raced up my spine, and I tried to convince myself that it was because of his dangerous air and not a reaction to the possibility that he was attracted to me. "Are you a cop? Has enough time passed for you guys to finally put some effort into looking for Stacy?" My gaze drifted down his torso, and I took a step back when I didn't see a badge clipped at his waist. He must have recognized my fear because he lifted his hands, palms facing me in a placating gesture. "I'm not a cop, but I am checking into what happened to the girl who used to live here." "I guess that 'used to live here' is the polite way to describe what happened to Stacy," I scoffed with a shake of my head as I tried to keep a handle on my reaction to his raspy growl. "But it's not how I'd describe it." He pulled his sunglasses off, and I felt as though I was pinned into place by his dark stare. "How would you put it?" I narrowed my eyes, trying to decide if telling him my suspicions was worth the effort. Nobody else seemed to care that Stacy was missing, and he looked like a guy who could get things done, so I decided to go for it. "I would say that Paul Barrington had something to do with whatever happened to her, and that's why nobody is willing to do anything about it. Stacy went to the cops about him a month ago because he was harassing her over something. She wouldn't give me any details because she said I'd be in danger if I knew too much. But I've heard enough rumors around campus to hazard an educated guess." Most people would have been shocked by my accusation, but the only reaction I got from him was a muscle jumping in his jaw. "What do you suspect Barrington did to your neighbor?" "I think he was pressuring her into either selling drugs or pimping herself. I've heard that he goes after vulnerable girls who don't have anyone to speak up for them." My grip on my travel mug tightened as I thought about how excited Stacy had been when Paul first started paying attention to her. He pretends to be into them, asking them out on dates, taking them to nice restaurants, sending flowers. Whatever it takes until he's got the girl convinced that he only wants the best for them. And that's when he goes in for the kill. The guy took a step toward me and I backed up again. Although I was spilling my guts to him, he was still a stranger, and I was acutely aware of my vulnerability after Stacy's disappearance. He held completely still as my doorknob pushed against the middle of my back. "You seem certain that Barrington is responsible for the girl's disappearing act." "It's not an act," I hissed. "Getting her degree was too important to Stacy for her to risk messing up her grades. She's here on scholarship, and the school will pull her funding if her average falls below a 3.4. Before she met Paul, Stacy hadn't missed a single class in 3 semesters, She even went when she was sick. There's no way she wouldn't have let her professors know if she was going to be gone. And I know she didn't reach out to any of them because I asked. Dimples appeared in his cheeks when he frowned, making him even more attractive. And you already went to the cops with your suspicions? Yep. I let the P at the end pop, and his eyes darkened when his gaze dropped to my lips. I barely resisted the urge to wet them with my tongue before I added, and the police didn't want to hear any of it since Stacy is an adult. Pretty much all they did was pull up her record. They told me she had a history of running away from foster homes when she was younger, so she probably did the same now. Without any proof that something actually happened to her, they filed a missing persons report and promptly put it at the bottom of the pile. I don't think they even bothered to check the nearest hospital since I'd already called around. I was about to ask him what the non-committal sound meant when one of the alarms I'd set on my phone went off, alerting me that I needed to be in my class in an hour. I'd set up a few of them in case I overslept or got so wrapped up in my studying that I lost track of time and ended up missing my exam. Pulling my phone out of the pocket on the side of my yoga pants, I muttered, "Crap." The mystery man straightened and seemed more alert when he asked, "Everything okay?" "Yeah, but I need to get going, or else I'm the one who's going to need to worry about failing. One of my professors apparently has something against vacations because she scheduled a big exam for this morning when our brains are already looking ahead to break next week," I explained as I shoved my cell phone back into my pocket. "Good luck," he murmured, turning away from me. As he slipped through the door that led to the stairs, and I watched his butt the entire way, I made a mental note to tell Grace's dad about the mystery man. Jonah had become a billionaire by owning the best security company in the world, so I went to him for help when it had become clear the cops weren't going to do anything about Stacy's situation.
Chapter 2. Merrick. I exited the dorm and walked at a measured pace to the parking lot. Fading into the background and not drawing attention to myself had been ingrained in me years ago. It came naturally now. Even though I wanted to hurry back to my hotel so I could do some research, my instincts kicked in and kept me from kicking up my pace. When I reached the rented, nondescript dark sedan, I slipped into the driver's seat and started the engine. Calling on all my patience, I drove off campus to my makeshift base of operations. Once I was back in my room and sitting at the desk with 2 open laptops and a tablet, I started digging. This wasn't unusual for me. Thorough research kept me alive. However, it wasn't my target that had my attention this time. Instead, my mind was consumed with pale green eyes, soft, honey-colored hair, a body with curves in all the right places, and freckles. The freckles were killing me. I wanted to wipe away every trace of makeup she used to hide the ones on her gorgeous face, then search for more all over her body. I was a little shocked at my reaction. I'd never found freckles to be a turn-on. But damn, the second I saw her, I gained a new appreciation for their sex appeal. I'd been hard as a fucking baseball bat in a split second. Then she'd licked her full, shiny lips, and I was torn between thoughts of tasting them and pictures of them wrapped around my fat cock. The sexual tension had only grown thicker when I noticed the heat sparking in her pretty eyes as she perused my body. Fucking hell, I thought, as I shifted in my chair, trying to find a more comfortable position, and failing. I tried to shake off my lust, as it was only distracting me when I needed to focus. I told myself my attraction to her had nothing to do with why I was stalking her. She'd seen my face. I had to take care of her. Of course, I wouldn't kill her. My targets were only low-life scum that needed to be given a one-way ticket to hell. But I couldn't leave a witness. There was no other option, especially not after she'd gone to the police. When Barrington turned up missing, his dad was sure to turn his attention her way. I was going to have to take her. And keep her. Satisfied with my plan, I hacked into the school records and looked up her dorm room. Audrey Cantrell. Even her name was beautiful. I sound like a lovesick schoolboy. Get it together, jackass. I shook my head to clear away all the poetic shit and think of her as a job. 20 years old. English Lit major. Home address was listed as an Upper West Side address. Tuition and room and board paid in full, no grants or loans. Considering the location of her residence and her tuition situation, it was clear she came for money. But her family situation was unknown, and it would affect my plans for her. So I backed out of the school servers, leaving no trace of my intrusion, and continued hunting. I dug up any digital footprint I could find. Records, social media, a blog, anything that would shape my plan. The devil was always in the details. She had living parents and one brother named Sailor, ironic considering my past as a SEAL, who was almost 4 years younger. Her latest posts on social media had to do with her best friend's wedding in 1 week. The wheels in my mind started turning. A wedding could provide me with the perfect opportunity to kidnap Audrey. Then I saw the bride's name. Fuck. Grace Kendall, formerly Carrington. I rolled my eyes to the ceiling and pinched the bridge of my nose. When I received the email from Rogue detailing my current job specs, I'd raised a brow at his casual mention of Jonah Carrington. When it came to security, especially cyber-related, no one was better. We'd never met, but his reputation was well known by anyone even remotely related to the business. He was ruthless when it came to protecting his family, and from Audrey's posts, it was easy to see that they considered her as one of their own. I ran through multiple scenarios, but the wedding always came up as the best plan. I would simply have to be extra careful to avoid suspicion once they realized she was gone. After spending a few more hours learning as much as I could about Audrey, for research purposes, I forced myself to switch my focus to my target. Paul Barrington. That little asshole was into some twisted shit. Besides the drugs, trafficking, weapons and women, he owned a dungeon and a couple of sex clubs. Rumor had it that some people who went in left bruised, bloody, and broken. Others never came out at all. Yet he'd never been convicted of one fucking crime, not even a speeding ticket. All because Daddy was a corrupt politician who collected secrets and favors. Usually, my job consisted of one target, in and out. I had a knack for disappearing into the shadows. One reason Huntley had given me the moniker after a few missions together. However, Jonah's job description had come with a little extra this time. Rogue asked me to do a little in-person reconnaissance for the missing girl. They figured I could do it without being seen. My mind drifted to Audrey. What the fuck had I been thinking to not only stop and talk to her, but also let her get a good look at my face? Although now that I knew about her connection to Carrington, our conversation shed light on why I was sticking my head into a missing persons case. Thoughts about my girl reminded me of the timeline I'd laid out for myself. I quickly wrote up my conclusions about Stacy and shot my report off to Jonah directly. Then I spent the rest of the day familiarizing myself with Paul's schedule. It worked out nicely for me that the sick sociopath stuck to routines. It was well into the early morning hours when I finally convinced myself to go to bed. After several erotic dreams that left me aching to be inside Audrey's delectable body and waking up to a mess when I'd come during a dream about filling her with my seed, I gave up. The next couple of nights were no better, but I was used to functioning on little sleep. Finally, the day came for me to take care of Paul. They found his body in one of his clubs with a needle in his arm and a lethal amount of heroin in his system. Considering all the crimes he was suspected of and his history of drug use, the police ruled it an overdose and closed the case. I spent the next couple of days prepping for my next assignment. The day before the wedding, I had a private plane standing by with my things already on board. I gone through Audrey's dorm while she was in class one day and made a note of her sizes and the food in her mini-fridge. So there were shopping bags full of girly shit and clothes waiting for her on the plane, too. It felt like the night lasted for fucking ever. But after stripping the sheets from the bed yet again, I took a shower, then slipped into a black suit I had custom-made during the week. The situation at the church already felt like chaos when I arrived, which suited me perfectly. I melted into the background, keeping a close eye for my girl. Eventually, she and the bride exited the room where they'd been getting ready and started toward the entrance to the chapel, where Jonah was waiting. I frowned at the way Audrey's dress clung to her curves, leaving nothing to the imagination. I was going to rip that sorry excuse for a dress to shreds at the first opportunity. The desire to run straight to her and snatch her up was nearly overwhelming, but I held on to my patience and slipped into a hallway on my left, staying hidden in the shadows, and waited for my moment. Grace suddenly appeared, but she didn't spare a single glance in my direction as she hurried into the bathroom. She came out less than 2 minutes later and walked quickly toward the end of the hallway, presumably to catch up with the bridal party. In her haste, she tripped over her dress and would have fallen on her ass if I hadn't stepped out and caught her. Once I'd settled her on her feet, she glanced back at me and murmured, "Thank you." "No problem," I growled, irritated at having been seen. And still pissed about that scrap of fabric on Audrey, giving every motherfucker here more than a peek at what was mine. Jonah was hurrying to Grace's side, but he was focused on her, allowing me to slip into the doorway of an empty room. They headed back toward the chapel, and with all the people in the wedding party and little kids running around, it was a great time to kick it up a notch so that I could make a grab for Audrey without anyone being the wiser. I strolled toward them as though I belonged there, not drawing a single eye, and made a beeline for the little red contraption on the wall. I yanked the handle, and the fire alarm blared, sending everyone into a panic. People were running in every direction, corralling guests and children toward the front door. Audrey was behind Grace, holding up her train. Adjusting my presence so I fit in with the frenzied atmosphere, I came up behind my woman and slipped an arm around her waist. Startled, she dropped the fabric in her hand, and I didn't even have to pause my stride as I carried her to the back entrance of the church. With all the noise, no one heard her protest, and as soon as we were out of sight, I clapped a hand over her mouth. Damn, she felt good pressed against me. Yeah, I was definitely keeping her.
Chapter 3. Audrey. It took me a moment to realize I was being kidnapped. With so many people in the church, it shouldn't have been possible, especially since the men in Grace's family weren't the kind that most people wanted to cross. Her dad and his friends were all billionaires who were fiercely protective of their families. They had the resources to take down anyone who even tried to hurt someone they cared about, and I was squarely within that umbrella of protection since Grace and I were practically sisters. But pandemonium had struck when the fire alarm went off, and nobody noticed that I was being carried toward the back of the building instead of heading out front with everyone else. No one could hear me over the blare of the alarm, and once we were out of sight, a hand was pressed over my mouth. I struggled against the person holding me, but it didn't do any good. I was no match against the strength of whoever had snatched me. With their tall, muscular build, I could tell that my kidnapper was a man and tried to kick toward his crotch and nail him in the balls. I missed, and all my muscles locked up when he grunted, "Careful, kitten.
You might regret it someday if you damage the family jewels."
His low, growly voice sent tingles zipping to my core and dampened my panties. Holy crap! Was I lusting after the man who just stolen me? Seriously? Irritated at my physical response, I struggled again, but it didn't do me any good. His biceps bunched and his knuckles turned white. But that was the extent of what it took for him to control my movements. He weaved his way through the back hallways of the church as though he had memorized the route and could have done it blindfolded. Clearly, this hadn't been a spur-of-the-moment decision. He'd planned this. He shifted his hold on me to open the door to the rear exit, then scanned the alley to ensure nobody was around. When he set me on my feet, keeping a tight grip on my upper arms, I was finally able to see my kidnapper's face. "You!" I instantly recognized the mystery man from earlier in the week. I'd spent more time daydreaming about him than I was willing to admit. My gasp was muffled by his palm, but he still seemed to understand what I'd said. He removed his hand and stared down at me with an unreadable expression.
"Yeah, I figured you'd remember my face."
"That's why you're snatching me?" He didn't let me go far when I tugged my arms and tried to take a step back. "You don't have to do this," I pleaded. "I can pretend I have no idea who you are if that's what it takes for you to let me go. If anyone asks, I never saw anyone coming out of Stacy's dorm room. I swear." He sighed, shaking his head.
"It's not that simple, kitten."
"I'm not your kitten," I snapped, narrowing my eyes at him. A glimmer of humor shone from his dark eyes.
"Yet you hiss and scratch like one when you're pissed off."
"Sorry for not going meekly along with my own kidnapping," I scoffed as I tried to pull free again. His lips curved into a smirk, and he shrugged.
"It's sexy."
My jaw dropped, and I tried really hard to hide how much I liked hearing him call me sexy. I jammed my hands onto my hips and glared at him. "Don't get any ideas, Buster." His smirk turned a little wicked, and a smug glint entered his beguiling eyes.
"You and I both know you were attracted to me when we met."
I wanted to smack and kiss his face at the same time. He was right, but I wasn't willing to admit it to him. "I don't know what you're talking about." His expression darkened, and he took my chin firmly between his thumb and index finger.
"Don't lie to me, kitten,"
he growled,
"or you won't like the consequences."
There was no doubt he meant it, and I gulped hard. I was scared, but my stupid, traitorous body clearly hadn't received the memo that it shouldn't be attracted to the man holding me hostage. I nearly gasped as a thought entered my mind. Was I going to be one of those crazy women who fell for their captor? Stockholm Syndrome? Really, Audrey? To my shock, he suddenly added,
"I will never lie to you, Audrey. Trust me."
Okay, I'd had enough of this. Why would I trust you when you're trying to kidnap me?
"I'm not trying anything."
He grunted as he tugged me away from the building.
"I'm successfully kidnapping you."
"Let me go!" I shouted as I began to struggle once more. My fear notched back up when I saw the dark sedan idling near the entrance to the alley. No matter how fierce my attraction was to this mystery man, I still didn't know where he was taking me or what he planned when we got there. His promise not to lie to me sounded as if he didn't intend to kill me. Was he going to hold me for ransom?
"Sorry, kitten. You're coming with me. You've seen my face."
He paused, then muttered,
"And it's for your own good."
For my own good? Being kidnapped? This guy might have been hot as sin, but I was starting to think he was also bat-crap crazy. He wrapped his left arm around my back and pulled me against his chest, while his right hand dipped into the inside pocket on his immaculately tailored suit coat. Something was seriously wrong with me, because I couldn't help admiring how good he looked and what he was wearing. I also melted into his hold for a moment. "Quit noticing how sexy he is, Audrey," I berated myself. His looks, and how amazing it felt to be wrapped up in his arms, flew out of my mind when I saw the hypodermic needle in his hand. That put the fight right back into me. "No!" I gasped as I squirmed and wiggled with all of my might. But he was still able to lift the needle to his mouth and pull the cap off with his teeth. I cried out when I felt the sting in my upper arm. "Please," I pleaded, "just let me go."
"Never going to fucking happen, Audrey,"
he growled as he held me perfectly still while slowly pushing the plunger all the way down. I glared up at him as he pulled the needle from my skin and shoved it and the cap back into his pocket. "I know very powerful people," I warned, trying to hide my panic. "They'll find me, and you'll be sorry you ever took me."
"Just relax, kitten. I won't hurt you,"
he murmured as he smoothed back a lock of hair that had fallen out of my updo onto my forehead while I had been struggling.
"They're no match for me, especially when it comes to you. You're mine now. No one is ever going to take you from me."
I was utterly confused by his statements, but my brain was too fuzzy to figure out what he meant by them. I tried unsuccessfully to push words past my lips as my consciousness drained from my body, the drugs quickly taking effect.
Chapter 4. Merrick. I brushed a kiss over Audrey's forehead after I swept her limp body into my arms. Drugging her hadn't been my first choice, but a scenario where she went with me willingly wasn't likely. Gently, I placed her in the car and secured the seatbelt around her. Then I jogged around to the driver's side and slid in. We were headed to the Teterboro Airport, where a private plane was waiting to take us to Los Angeles. I collected a favor from a previous client with deep pockets who'd asked for a little more than the services I usually provided. With the weekenders returning to the city, there was little traffic on the way out, and we made it to the airport in less than 45 minutes. I drove the car into the hangar and exited, tossing the keys to a man in jeans and a logoed polo. Our bags had already been loaded onto the plane this morning. I'd packed Audrey's after she'd left for the wedding. I'd only given her a mild sedative, but it would be enough to knock her out for most of the plane ride across the country. After unbuckling her, I gathered her into my arms and stalked toward the plane. The attendant didn't look twice at us as he got into the car and moved it into a parking spot on the other side. Considering his employer, a man carrying an unconscious woman onto the plane was probably mundane. Once we were on board, I took Audrey back to the bedroom and gently laid her on the bed. I removed her shoes and put them on the floor next to the bed before pulling the pins from her silky hair. Her face was soft in sleep, and she looked incredibly beautiful. I put the pins in the drawer of the nightstand and turned to leave her to rest. Halfway to the door, I stopped and twisted my head to look at her over my shoulder. I was tempted, so tempted, to climb into that bed and find out what it felt like to have her pressed against me when I wasn't holding her captive. Although the idea of restraining her while I explored every inch of her body was definitely appealing, it would have to wait until she was not only fully aware of what was happening, but had agreed to it. Seducing her into agreeing wasn't out of the realm of consideration, though. I shored up my control and left the bedroom, locking the door behind me. The plane had just landed and was taxiing to the hangar when I heard a shout from the bedroom, and the door began to rattle. I glanced at my watch. Pretty spot on with that dose. The rattles became violent shakes as I approached the door and withdrew the key from my pocket. I didn't contemplate why the plane's owner had changed it so that this room locked from the outside. Not when it suited my purposes at the moment. Audrey yanked hard again, just as the mechanism released, and I made sure to keep a tight grasp on the door so she wouldn't go flying backward. As soon as I let go, it flung open to reveal a very sexy, very pissed-off woman. My eyes locked onto her body as if drawn by a magnet. She breathed heavily, making her perfect tits bounce. Her skin was flushed from being so worked up, and her eyes were spitting fire. Fucking hell, she's gorgeous. Audrey tried to fly past me, but I caught her around the waist and hauled her back against my body. Not so fast, kitten. She let out a cute little growl, making me grin because she just kept proving how perfect that nickname was for her. We need to go over the rules first. Let me off this plane, she seethed. My grin spread wider when her breathy tone changed its cadence and a shiver raced through her body. We're going to get off the plane, Audrey, just as soon as you put away your claws. I spoke softly, with my lips close enough to her ear that they brushed the skin with each movement. She stilled, and I wasn't sure if it was because she wanted off the plane or because of the desire I'd provoked. But then the shift of her body as she tightened her thighs gave her away. I don't want to have to drug you again, and I have no desire to carry you kicking and screaming to the car. So, you're going to behave and walk off this plane and get into the car like a good girl. Is that clear? I frowned when she stayed stubbornly silent. Cupping her chin in one hand, I turned her head so we were looking at each other. There was a mutinous scowl on her face. Sighing, I shook my head in exasperation. Don't make me spank you, kitten. If you so much as take one step out of line, I will redden your pretty little ass. She gasped as her eyes went wide, sparkling with shock, fear, and, though she'd most likely deny it, curiosity. You wouldn't. I narrowed my eyes in warning. Try me. Her lips pinched, but after a beat, she nodded. Slowly, I released her, and when she didn't bolt, I gestured for her to walk ahead of me to the entrance of the plane. I stopped a few feet from the door to grab our bags from the luggage compartment. The second I turned away, she took off, but I'd been a fucking SEAL before I became a hitman. Lightning-fast reflexes were what kept me alive in both careers. Growling, I caught her arm in 2 strides and marched over to the front row of seats. I tugged her down with me as I sat, but guided her body so she landed face down, draped over one knee. I promised never to lie to you, kitten, I grunted. Her bridesmaid dress was long, but there was a slit up the side that went to her knee. I quickly ripped the seam up to her waist, then shoved the fabric aside. I nearly swallowed my tongue as I stared at the creamy flesh of her perfect, heart-shaped ass. All of it was on display due to the single strip of silk between her cheeks. Her wiggling and fists pounding on my thigh snapped me out of my trance, and I immediately slapped a palm onto one naked globe. I barely registered Audrey's roar of outrage, too mesmerized by the pink handprint on her milky, beautifully speckled skin. It began to fade, and I frowned, anxious to see my stamp of ownership on her again. One of her fists flew back and almost made contact with my nose before dropping down in an effort to reach the rapidly growing bulge in my pants. I grabbed both wrists and shackled them behind her back in one of my hands. Then I used the other to spank her sweet ass until it was red and the marks didn't fade. My cock was leaking like a fucking sieve. She'd know who she belonged to every time she sat down for at least the next few days. Knowing that made me hot as hell. Audrey's protests had continued, but they'd lost their bite, and her squirming had localized to her center, as if she were trying to find relief from an internal ache, one I was all too familiar with. We would definitely be exploring that eventually, but right now I just wanted to get her home. After petting each ass cheek to soothe them a little, I covered them again and adjusted her position so she was sitting up on my lap. "Are you going to behave?" She bit her lip and avoided my gaze, but nodded with a resigned expression. I wanted to kiss the frown right off her lips, but it wasn't the right time. Setting her on her feet, I grabbed the bags and followed her to the stairs. After descending, I put my hand to the small of her back and guided her over to my black Audi. The car beeped when it unlocked, and the trunk sprung open. As I tossed the luggage in the back, Audrey blanched. "Is that my suitcase?" she shrieked. "Of course," I answered with a shrug, ushering her to the passenger side. But how did you—" she sputtered. "Kitten, you have a lot to learn about me, but one thing you should know." I turned her to face me and crowded her against the car, locking our eyes. "I'm very thorough." Then I gently moved her to the side, opened the door, and helped her into her seat. The drive to my house was silent, though I was pleased to notice that Audrey's fear seemed to be dissipating. She'd replaced it with attitude, which was adorable and hot at the same time. My little sex kitten. Shortly after my first few jobs with Ruthless Corp, I took the money I'd earned and bought a warehouse in the hills just outside the city. The building had already been designed to be a fortress to protect its contents, so it hadn't taken much to make the warehouse impenetrable. I'd gutted the inside and built it as if it were a luxury home. This way, from the outside, no one would think twice about the place. And on the inside, it was a large, comfortable living space. I pulled up to the gate and punched in a code on the freestanding keypad. The door to the high, electrified fence slowly glided open. I pointed out a warning sign posted and told Audrey, "Those aren't just for show." I didn't want her thinking they were a decoy and hurting herself. Apparently, she misunderstood my point because she crossed her arms in a huff and muttered, "I get it, stay in my cage." As she glanced at the building, she grimaced. And what a lovely cage it is. I decided to leave her to her assumptions because her reaction would be a lot more fun once she entered the house. There was an area at the back of the building that I'd converted into a garage, so I hit a button to raise the door and pulled the car in. Then I repeated the action to close it before shutting off the engine. "Welcome to your new home, kitten," I said. My voice was naturally low and raspy, so it came out sounding a little more ominous than I'd intended. She swallowed hard and continued to stay in her seat. "My new home? Just how long are you expecting me to be here?" Instead of answering right away, I exited the car and jogged around to open her door. She still didn't move, so I bent and unlatched her seatbelt before scooping her into my arms. "Was I not clear enough earlier, Audrey?" I murmured as I headed to the door leading into the back of the house. "I can't let you go. You're mine now." "But I promised not to say anything," she cried. I was a little surprised and pleased that, despite her distress, she was no longer fighting me. "I can't take that chance," I explained with a shrug. "And even if I could, I wouldn't." "Why would—" Her voice trailed off as I walked through a security room and into a large, open kitchen. I might have been a killer for hire, but I still had hobbies like any normal person, and one of mine happened to be cooking. So I'd spared no expense. "This is amazing," she breathed, thoroughly distracted. "I'm glad you like it." I continued into a massive living area separated from the kitchen by a large island that could seat at least 12. "I'll give you the full tour later," I promised as I kept moving toward the stairs by the front door. "There's an indoor pool and gym on the lower level, a theater room, game room, a couple of bedrooms, and my office on this floor." I took the stairs 2 at a time, and at the top of the landing, I hesitated for a split second before changing the direction I had intended to go. You're welcome to use anything and everything you see. The only place that isn't open to you is my office. Even if she knew what I really did for a living, too much sensitive information could be found in there for me to give her free rein like I had over the rest of the house. "What's in your office?" she asked immediately. "Nothing you need to worry about," I answered vaguely. "That's such a... wow." Again, her comment was cut short when she entered the master bedroom. The entire back wall was glass. Since we were high up in the hills, the window looked out over the city, but the lights weren't disruptive from this far away. "You'll be in this room," I told her as I lowered her onto her feet. She tore her gaze from the view and surveyed her surroundings. When she next met my eyes, hers were narrowed with suspicion. "Is this your room?" She'd obviously seen the few items I'd left scattered about before leaving for New York. "Yes," I said unapologetically. Huffing, Audrey put her hands on her hips and glared at me. "You better be planning on sleeping in a guest room far, far away if you expect me to sleep in here." I prowled toward her, and she slowly backed up until I had her pressed against the glass and caged between my arms. "Is that really what you want, kitten?" Her mouth opened and closed a few times, as if she couldn't quite find her words. "Because I think you like the idea of going to bed with me." I palmed one of her shoulders, and my hand slid down as I spoke. "I'm betting your punishment on the plane made you so wet it ruined your panties. And even though you think you shouldn't, you want more." My hand traveled down her torso and slipped between the torn pieces of her skirt. She sucked in a breath as my hand met the hot skin of her hip, and I smiled wickedly. I kept moving down until I was at the juncture between her thighs. "Am I right, Audrey?" I purred. "Are you drenched at the thought of what I could do to your body?" I didn't wait for her to answer before cupping her pussy and groaning at the heat that enveloped my fingers. I'd been more than right, too. She was fucking soaked. "Do you want more, little kitten?" Audrey's beautiful green eyes became even paler when they were clouded with lust, but my little hellcat still tried to hiss and scratch. "How do you know a good spanking doesn't always get me off? I could be a dominatrix for all you know about me." I tossed my head back and laughed, despite the burn of jealousy that streaked through me at the thought of another man with his hands on her ass. When my mirth faded, I cradled the back of her skull to hold her in place as I lowered my head so our lips were only a breath away. The hand between her legs tightened, my fingers pushing the wet, sticky fabric of her panties between her folds, and the heel of my hand put pressure at the top of her pussy. Audrey moaned and shuddered. "Even if I hadn't already known you were a virgin, Audrey, I would have figured it out by the way you respond to me. Your reactions are honest and clearly new to you." "That doesn't mean it's because of you," she tried to argue, despite another moan slipping from between her pouty lips when I ground my hand against her hard little bundle of nerves. "Maybe it's just because—" I'd had enough of her mouthy responses and decided to shut her up and make my point at the same time. I crushed my mouth down over hers, intending to give her one deep, thorough kiss to prove I was right, then leave her to rest while I made dinner. The second our lips touched, I felt my control slip. But when Audrey whimpered and melted into me, I lost it completely.
Chapter 5. Audrey. I'd been kidnapped, drugged, flown across the country. I'd seen enough landmarks during the drive to know that we were in Los Angeles, spanked and brought to a place I had very little hope of escaping, judging by the security measures I'd spotted so far. But fear wasn't my primary emotion at the moment. I couldn't think past the pure, unadulterated lust I was feeling. I was so turned on that I wouldn't be surprised if I spontaneously combusted at any minute. I'd never experienced anything like this before, and all I knew was that I wanted more. I was so close to the edge as my kidnapper plundered my mouth. When he finally lifted his head and pressed his palm against my clit again, I held my wits just long enough to pant, "I don't even know your name." Desire had darkened his brown eyes almost to black, but I still caught a gleam of humor in them as he answered,
"Considering what I'm about to do to your sexy as fuck body, that seems like a fair question."
I shivered at the sensual promise in his raspy tone, even as I narrowed my eyes at him. "Does that mean you're going to tell me?" He lifted his hands to cradle my cheeks with his palms, and one of his thumbs stroked over my bottom lip as he stared into my eyes while he considered how to answer.
"Yeah, since you're not going anywhere without me, I guess there isn't much risk in you knowing my name. It's Merrick Ashford."
Merrick Ashford. Geesh, he even had a hot guy name. And holy heck, his lips felt amazing as he trailed hot, wet kisses along my jaw and down my neck. When he ground his hardness against me and growled,
"I fucking ache for you, kitten. Didn't know I could need anyone or anything this badly."
Feminine triumph surged through my veins. Merrick might have been strong enough to snatch me right out from under everyone's noses, but I held a certain power over him. Knowing that I wasn't alone in my fierce need, something clicked deep inside me and allowed me to throw caution to the wind. I twined my arms around his neck, and he slowly backed up until he hit the bed and we tumbled onto the mattress. As soon as we were horizontal, Merrick levered his body over mine and lowered his head to capture my mouth again. Our kiss quickly spiraled out of control, just like the last one. I widened my legs to cradle his hips between my thighs, and a deep groan rumbled up his chest. When his hard length pressed against my wet core with only my thong and his pants between us, I let out a little whimper of need and dug my nails into his shoulders.
"Not so fast, kitten,"
he whispered against my lips.
"I need a taste of your sweet pussy before I take your cherry."
I almost orgasmed from his dirty talk alone, but my pleasure grew higher when he rose to his knees and yanked the skirt of my dress up past my hips. With the already ripped seam, he was able to shove the material even higher, exposing the lace bra I was wearing to his hungry gaze.
"Your tits are fucking gorgeous. Even better than I imagined with that smattering of freckles across your soft skin."
I arched my back off the mattress as he slipped his hand beneath my body to slide down the zipper of my dress and undo my bra clasp. Then I was spread out beneath him with only my panties left. Still dressed in his suit, he looked so powerful kneeling above me. When he started to loosen his tie, I sat up and wrapped my fingers around his wrist. "Not yet."
"Does my fierce little kitten want me to eat her pretty pussy while she's naked and I'm fully dressed?"
I felt the heat of my blush as it spread across my chest, my nipples puckering tight as I bit my bottom lip. His dark gaze swept down my body until his eyes focused between my legs.
I'm going to take your reaction as a hell yes. I can see how turned on you are. The scrap of lace covering your pussy is fucking drenched. Your teeny tiny panties aren't nearly enough protection to keep me away from what belongs to me now."
With a flick of his wrist, he tore the lace material from my body and shoved it in his pocket. Then he bent over my body to suck one of my nipples into his mouth. I felt the tug of his lips all the way to my core and arched up to press my breast deeper into his mouth. He released my nipple with a pop, and then his tongue traced a path over my freckles before his teeth sank into the rounded globe, hard enough to leave a mark. A cross between a startled yelp and a moan escaped my lips, and his dark gaze drifted up to my face.
"No rushing me, kitten. I'm going to take my sweet time enjoying your body."
His lips wrapped around my other nipple, and I melted into the mattress. Once he'd finished driving me wild by playing with my breasts, he shuffled back to lie down between my legs. With his face only inches from my bare pussy, his nostrils flared as he inhaled deeply.
You smell so fucking good. And I bet you're going to taste even better."
He pressed my legs wider and nipped at the soft skin of my inner thigh, making my muscles clench. Then I was swept away by pleasure when he leaned forward to trace up my center with his tongue. My nails dug into his scalp. "Oh, yes, that feels so good."
"Just wait. I've barely even started."
He licked and sucked on my pussy, swirling his tongue around my clit before dipping lower to thrust his tongue inside my center. He built my pleasure higher until I felt as though I was about to fly apart into a million pieces. Then he pinched my clit, and I exploded. He didn't let up until I was close to the edge again. I whimpered when he lifted his head, but he didn't leave me in need for long. I stared in wonder as he stripped his clothes from his body, licking my lips at the bunching of his biceps and flexing of his forearms. But when he reached the point where he shoved his boxers down his thighs, I gasped. Holy crap! His lips curved into a reassuring smile, and dimples popped in his cheeks.
"Don't worry, kitten. You were made to take my cock."
Before I could question his certainty, Merrick settled himself over my body and captured my mouth in a deep kiss. While our tongues tangled together, he rocked his hips to slide his hard length through my wetness before nudging my center. When he slowly eased the tip inside, he nipped my bottom lip. The slight sting distracted me enough that I didn't notice he'd punched his hips forward until the pain hit and I felt stretched beyond my limit. It didn't hurt as much as I'd expected after seeing how long and wide his dick was, but I definitely wasn't comfortable. Merrick kissed the tears that leaked down my cheeks, holding his body perfectly still with his cock anchored deep inside my pussy. After a little while, the pain eased enough for me to give my hips an experimental wiggle. His hard length dragged against my inner walls, sending sparks of pleasure through my body. "Oh, wow."
"Better?"
he grunted, his dark eyes scanning my face for any hint that I wasn't okay. "So good," I moaned.
"Thank fuck, because I wasn't sure how much longer I could hold out with your perfect pussy strangling my cock."
He pulled almost all the way out, and then snapped his hips forward again, filling me until his balls slapped against my butt cheeks. He repeated the motion, starting off slow before picking up the pace, until all I could do was hold on while he was hammering in and out of me. As my pleasure climbed higher, he shoved my legs up so my knees were pressed against my chest. With the new angle, he slid in even deeper on his next thrust, and I screamed as I flew apart, my orgasm stronger than anything I've ever felt before.
"That's right, kitten. Take every fucking inch while you milk my cock."
"Yes, Merrick, yes!" I cried. I felt the heat of Merrick's cum as his dick jerked, filling me until our mixed fluids were dripping down my inner thighs. I was still out of breath when he rolled to his side, taking me with him and keeping his barely softened cock snug inside me. After everything that had happened today, A million things should have been on my mind. Questions I needed to ask, demands to be let go. Instead, I settled against his chest and yawned. Maybe it was the mind-blowing orgasms, or the after-effects of whatever Merrick had drugged me with, but I couldn't seem to keep my eyes open. Since there wasn't much I could do about the unusual situation I'd found myself in right at the moment, I gave in to my body's demand for more rest and drifted off to sleep.
Chapter 6. Merrick. Nothing in my life so far could possibly compare to waking up with my cock buried in my woman's pussy. However, I worried about how sore she would be after I'd taken her so hard and then kept her stretched around my hardness for a few hours. I'd made it through SEAL training, countless missions, worked over criminals, and killed in some very violent ways. But the hardest and accurate description thing I ever had to do was pull out of Audrey. She whimpered in her sleep and clung to me as if she was afraid I wouldn't come back. "No chance of that ever happening, kitten," I whispered in her ear. "I'm going to live inside your hot little pussy. At least until I'd made sure I'd left my kid in her belly." Protection hadn't even occurred to me last night until I was spilling my seed inside her. In an instant, I pictured her naked with a round, adorably freckled, swollen belly. The image was so fucking hot that I'd almost given in to the desire to take her again right at that moment. And I'd known there was no chance in hell I would ever fuck her with something between us. There was no going back after I'd felt Audrey's hot, tight pussy wrapped around my bare cock. My cell phone buzzed on the nightstand, and I quickly stretched my arm out to snatch it up and shut it off so that the noise wouldn't wake Audrey. Slowly, I forced myself to let her go and rolled out of bed. I glanced at the screen on my phone to see a missed call from Rogue. There was also an email from him. I dragged on a pair of jeans and made my way downstairs to my office. Once I'd taken a seat in front of my desk, I opened the email. In it was a dossier for a new target. Fuck. I'd just brought Audrey home. I couldn't go running off on an assignment until I was sure she would be here when I got back. Scooting my chair up to my desk, I set my phone down and turned on my computer. I tapped into Ruthless Corp's criminal database and found Jack Carlson's record. After scanning his rap sheet, I could understand why someone had paid to take him out. He was definitely scum of the earth. Apparently, he was in the San Diego area, which would normally make it a quick trip. In, kill, out. I briefly considered taking Audrey with me, then threw that thought out immediately. I wouldn't expose her to the darker side of my life. She was my sunshine, and I didn't want to risk dimming her light. But turning down the job wasn't an option either. There's no saying no to Rogue, or you're out. Out. As my mind spun with options, I was surprised to find the idea of retirement among them. It wasn't that I felt guilty over what I did. Given the kind of people I took out, I was making the world safer for other people's Audreys. But I wouldn't want my child exposed to this life. When I came inside Audrey without protection, it irrevocably altered the course of my life. She was my #1 priority now. I wouldn't want to be out on a job, out of communication with my wife, and have her go into labor or any other emergency that I couldn't help with because I'd gone dark. There would have been similar circumstances if I had stayed in the Navy, but Ruthless Corp didn't have the same rules. It didn't matter where you were or what you were doing. When Rogue assigned you a mission, you did it, without question. I could request a break. Assassins needed vacations too, but there was no guarantee that he would honor it if he felt like I was the best or only one for a job. And once I was back on duty, I was still left with the same problem. Before Audrey, I thought I'd buried my own heart down so deep it would never resurface. Retirement had never been a consideration. I wasn't even sure if Rogue would let me out of the company. I hated the idea of having to go on the run with Audrey, but I would if I had to. She was the only thing in my life that mattered now. Frustrated with the whole situation, I shoved my chair back and stood. I'd deal with this shit later, because I didn't want Audrey to wake up alone. After shutting down my computer, I left the office and locked the door behind me. Then I jogged up the stairs and walked swiftly back to the bedroom. I'd only been a floor away, but the longer Audrey was out of my sight, the more anxious I became. A crooked smile curled my lips when I thought about the guys in my former unit. They would be having a field day with the way I was acting. They'd call me a pussy, but I didn't give a shit. I was whipped by a beautiful little kitten with a sweet pussy and a smart mouth, and I wasn't the least bit ashamed. How Audrey had reached the age of 20 without being snatched up by another man was baffling to me, although I was grateful, because I doubted I would have been able to walk away from her, and keeping a secret, like killing her boyfriend, would probably have put a strain on our relationship. My girl was still asleep when I padded into the room, but she stirred before I could slip back into bed with her. So I sat next to her and brushed some of her wayward hair out of her face as she blinked at me sleepily. She held the sheet against her chest and rose to a sitting position, her expression dazed and confused. "Good morning, kitten. Did you sleep well?" She trailed off as her eyes dropped to my naked chest and the open button on my jeans. A pretty blush stole across her cheeks, making her freckles seem more prominent, and I grinned. "You were a little wildcat in bed last night, and now you're shy?" I shook my head and winked. "Adorable." Audrey tried to find it, but her plump lips turned down into a pout. "Wildcats aren't adorable," she grumbled. I traced a finger over her lips, then along her jaw, before gliding down her neck to the valley between her tits and hooking the tip into the sheet. "You're adorable when you're my little kitten," I told her as I tugged the fabric away. She hadn't been holding it tight, so the material slipped out of her hand and pooled around her waist. My mouth watered at the sight of her perfectly round globes and their rosy tips. "But you're right. Wildcats aren't cute, and you were sexy as fuck last night." Her eyes darted to the sheet, and I could tell she was debating whether to give in to her shyness and cover up or prove she was a temptress. She had nothing to prove to me, though. She tempted me every minute of every hour. She ultimately succumbed to her bashful side and drew the sheet up to her neck. I chuckled and bent over to place a quick kiss on her lips. "Come," I commanded. "I'm going to draw you a bath." "What?" I glanced back to see her watching me curiously. "You're sore from last night." The pink color returned to her cheeks and spread down under the sheet. "And a bath will help soothe your aches." I grinned salaciously. "And the faster you heal, the faster I can sink back inside your hot little body." The shade of her skin darkened to crimson, deepening the color of her freckles, and I winked at her before turning my head back around and walking into the bathroom. I started the water and looked around, growling when I realized how bare the room was. There hadn't been time between meeting Audrey and stealing her to order a bunch of girly shit to make her more comfortable. I'd put in an order while she was taking a bath. Some bubble bath that inspired images of her naked body covered in suds dripping down her skin, slowly revealing all her secret places. Shaking my head to dispel the fantasy, I focused on finding her a towel. If I didn't stop the direction of my thoughts, she'd never make it to the bath. Or better yet, she'd end up riding me, hot and wet, with the water splashing all around us as I fucked up into her hard and fast. Get a fucking grip, Merrick. Right. I needed to think about something else. Food. Audrey needed food. She timidly entered the room a few seconds later and glanced around with interest. "This place is amazing," she observed with a tinge of awe in her tone. "You'd never know it looked like this from the outside." "That's the point," I replied with a wink. "Now drop the sheet, and I'll help you into the bath." "I'm perfectly capable of getting into a bathtub by myself," she snipped, holding the sheet tightly around her. I rolled my eyes and closed the distance between us in 2 strides. "Put away your claws, kitten. I'm perfectly aware of how strong and independent you are," I grunted as I ripped the sheet away with one hard yank. "But I'm sure you're stiff as well as sore. I don't want you to fall, and there's nothing wrong with letting me help you." Without waiting to see if she would agree, I swept her into my arms and crossed over to the bathtub, where I gently set her down in the water. A sigh escaped her lips, and the sound sent the last drops of blood in my brain straight to my already aching cock. Shit. I needed to leave. "Soak as long as you want. I'm going to make you some breakfast. If you finish before I come back, your bag is in the closet. You can join me in the kitchen or take a look around if you'd like." "I'm allowed to explore my gilded prison?" she asked dryly. I glanced back to see her glaring at me and turned to face her, crossing my arms over my chest. "This isn't your prison, Audrey," I corrected. "It's your home, and you can go wherever you want, with the exception of my office." I could see she was about to latch onto that statement and cut her off. "However, you can't leave and return as you please." She opened her mouth, and again I kept going. "Not because you're my hostage, kitten. It's for your safety." Her pretty green eyes narrowed. "I'm not sure I believe you." I shrugged and resumed walking to the door. "Believe me or not, it won't change anything." In the doorway, I paused and twisted my head to meet her pale green eyes. "I told you before, Audrey. You're mine, and I'm never letting you go. And that means keeping you safe from anyone who tries to take you from me." Without another word, or waiting for a response, I left and went down to the kitchen. Chapter 7. Merrick. Audrey wandered in just as I was loading a plate with French toast. She'd put on a t-shirt and a pair of clingy black pants that left nothing to the imagination. I wholeheartedly approved of them, as long as she never wore them outside the house. "Have a seat, kitten," I told her, nodding at the kitchen table. It sat in a sunny alcove that also looked out over the valley. I'd made sure plenty of windows let a lot of light into the place, so there was not even a single hint from the inside that this was a warehouse. In order to do that, and keep the house impenetrable, the windows were bulletproof, with a polycarbonate glaze to make them even stronger. As Audrey took a seat in the sunshine and gazed outside with a pleased expression, I mentally patted myself on the back for preparing for her even before I knew she existed. I set the plate of toast in front of her, then gathered the butter, syrup, and silverware, depositing those on the table as well. When I went to grab my own plate, I also poured her a glass of orange juice. "If I'm not your hostage," she started as she cut up her breakfast, "then I'm sure you wouldn't mind if I called Grace to let her know I'm all right." Her tone was nonchalant, but she was terrible at hiding her thoughts, something I loved about her, and it was easy to see that she thought she was testing me. I rose from the table and picked up my cell phone from the island in the kitchen. After returning to my seat, I unlocked the device before sliding it across the table to her. "Go ahead, kitten. I know it would make you unhappy to have your friend worrying over you, and I want you to be happy." One corner of her mouth lifted slightly, but her eyes brightened and her freckles stood out as pink bloomed on her cheeks. Thanks." I nodded and started in on my food. "Won't they be able to trace the call?" she asked suddenly. I nearly broke out into a massive grin at the sound of worry in her voice, but I managed to keep a straight face. "No, kitten, it's an untraceable burner. Trust me, even Jonah couldn't crack it." "You know Jonah?" she asked with a real smile. I would have been jealous at her obvious happiness, but some of her tension had melted away, and she was looking at me with happy eyes, not daydreaming about something else. "You could say that," I hedged. I'd promised not to lie, but I also didn't want her to realize that Jonah was the one who'd put a hit out on Barrington. "Oh, well, you should have said that back at the church," she said as she rolled her eyes, looking completely at ease. She dialed a number and was about to put the phone to her ear, but I tapped the table and gave her a hard look. One of her eyebrows arched before her whole brow knitted in confusion. "I thought you said I'm not a prisoner." "You're not, kitten, but I still want to make sure you don't say anything you shouldn't." "Why?" "For your safety," she finished for me, obviously irritated. "So you've said, but—" "And mine," I interrupted this time. Apparently, we were one of those couples who did the opposite to finishing each other's sentences. "Yours?" Her tone held less annoyance and more curiosity now. "Did you think I lied when I told you that I was taking you because you'd seen my face?" I asked with a frown. "I promised never to lie to you, Audrey." Her face fell. "Oh, that's why I can't ever leave?" I gentled my expression and reached across the table to trace her lips for a moment. "No, kitten. That's just an added perk." I winked, and she flushed adorably. "I knew the second I saw you that you were mine," I admitted softly. "The fact that you'd seen my face, well, it just gave me an excuse to take you." Her mouth had opened into a little O, and I used the same finger to push her jaw back up. "Call Grace, kitten." She blinked a few times, then dropped her eyes to the cell phone. After a beat, she hit send, then the speakerphone button, and set it on the table. "Who the fuck is this?" a man snarled when the line clicked on. "And why are you calling my wife?" "Give me back my phone, you caveman," a woman shouted from the background. "Chill, Hudson. It's Audrey." "Audrey?" the woman shrieked. "Give me my phone, or I swear to all that is holy you will be sleeping with the twins for a month." There was a tussle. Then the woman's voice came out louder, clearly in possession of her phone now. "That's what I thought. You're such a boy." She sighed, though her tone sounded as if she were trying not to laugh. "You're such a girl," he volleyed back. "My girl. I'll remind you later." "Hey, Grace," Audrey said with a muffled giggle. Grace huffed, but there was no real anger in it. "Where the hell have you been?" There was the anger. "You missed my freaking wedding, Audrey. I've been so worried. I thought maybe you'd been kidnapped." Audrey glanced at me, and I narrowed my eyes in warning. "Or we're dead or something." Yeah, I'm really sorry, Grace. Something important came up, or you know I never would have left before the reception." "What could possibly have kept you away from a party with all of my super good-looking—" I can't believe I was able to get that out of my mouth. "Single cousins?" An involuntary growl rumbled in my chest, and Audrey tossed me a look that reminded me of her wildcat nature and made things very, very uncomfortable in my pants. "I can't tell you right now, Grace. I will eventually, I promise." "Audrey, do I need to call my dad?" "No!" she almost shouted. Then she lowered her voice immediately. "No, it's all good. I just have some stuff to deal with." I raised an eyebrow and smirked. Audrey ignored me, making me chuckle. "I'm not sure how long it will be before I come home." All of my amusement fled, and I growled as I scowled at her, only to be ignored some more. Little kitten is clearly looking for a spanking. "What was that?" Grace asked. Audrey cleared her throat. "There's a dog here." "Here where?" "Grace, I love you, but you need to trust me and let it go." I grunted in annoyance, not happy to hear her say those words to anyone but me. "Okay. Oh, before I forget, I heard on the news that Paul Barrington is dead." Audrey gasped and then sighed. "Good riddance," she muttered. "Agreed. I guess it was a drug overdose. No one was shocked by that, and they already closed the case. Oh, and my dad said he's looking into the disappearance of the girl from your dorm? Yeah, I didn't know what else to do. He told me he acquired some information about her and was able to talk the police into finally opening a proper investigation. Audrey closed her eyes and sighed. Finally. I'll keep you updated. Wait, why didn't you call me from your phone? Whose phone is this? Are you in trouble? I'm calling my dad. Grace, Audrey cried, stopping her friend's rambling. I'm fine. I lost my phone. She glared at me, and I grinned. And I'll call you later. Love you. Bye. She stabbed the button to hang up the phone and slumped back into her chair as if she'd just finished a workout and needed to rest. I had let her call her friend because I thought it would make her happy, but she looked as though the ordeal had worn her out. If talking to Grace is going to stress you out like this, I'm not sure I'm going to allow it anymore, I muttered. I didn't like seeing her sad. Excuse me? Audrey snapped, straightening in her seat and glaring daggers at me. Much better. I'd rather see the wildcat and have her claws swiping in my direction than see her look so down. You keep contradicting yourself, Merrick. I'm not a prisoner, but I can't leave. I can make a call, but you have to listen. I can call my friend, and now you won't allow it. She used air quotes and scrunched her nose in frustration. Cute. What's next? Chaining me to the bed? I scratched my chin, looking thoughtful, then drawled, Not the worst idea. Audrey growled, but just started eating while glaring at me mutinously. Eventually, our plates were empty, and the silence between us had grown thick with tension. I didn't like it. I stood and went to her side, squatting down in front of her. Kitten, everything I do is to keep you safe. Okay, but... I cocked my head to the side and studied her as I waited for her to grasp her thoughts. Is this supposed to be my life? Forever? Because I can't live like this, Merrick. Right that moment, I made the decision. I wanted out. But since she didn't know I earned money by doing wet work, I couldn't exactly explain why she had to live this way a little longer. You won't have to, I vowed. Just give me a little time. Audrey eyed me suspiciously. Are you going to tie me to the bed until then? I grinned and caught her around the waist as I stood, bringing her with me. Like I said, I'm not ruling it out. But the truth is, I don't need to tie you up, kitten. I just need to wear you out so you don't have enough energy to defy me. Defy you? She asked with an arched brow. And what happens if I do? I leaned in and put my lips to her ear, smiling when she shivered. You know what will happen, Audrey. One of my hands rested on her hip, and I slid the other around to palm her ass and give it a squeeze. But if you need a reminder, I'm happy to oblige. Leaning back, I looked into her eyes, smirking when I saw how they glazed over with passion. Unable to resist, I crashed my mouth down on hers as I boosted her up with both hands on her ass and set her on the island. Her legs had closed around my waist, and I yanked her forward so she was on the edge of the counter. When I pressed my hard cock into the heat between her legs, Audrey moaned and wiggled as if trying to get closer. I tore my lips away from hers and pressed them into the soft skin of her neck, kissing my way down to her collarbone. How about just a reminder of who you belong to, kitten? I grunted. Then I leaned back far enough to whip her shirt over her head. I stared at her full, round tits, practically spilling out of a pink, lacy bra that I hadn't noticed when I'd been packing up her things. You're so fucking gorgeous, I growled. Her breathing was choppy, making her breasts jiggle. When I yanked down the cups of her bra, she gasped and her tits bounced enticingly. I latched onto one of her stiff nipples, and she moaned as she melted back onto the island. After licking and nibbling at one, I gave the other the same attention, while Audrey's hands held fast to my hair, her back arching to offer herself up for more. Finally, I'd had my fill of her tits, for now, and I traced a path with my tongue down the valley between her heavy globes to circle her cute little belly button. Then I paused at the waistband of her pants. I unlocked her legs from around my waist and ran my hands from her hips to her ankles and back up. These are hot as fuck, kitten, but if I ever catch you wearing them outside the house, your ass will be smarting for a week. What? Audrey had propped herself up on her elbows, and she stared at me blankly, still lost to the fog of lust surrounding her. Then the words sank in, and a stubborn glimmer shone in her eyes. I grinned and stripped her pants and underwear off so fast she didn't have a moment to protest. Not that she would have, considering I quickly slid my hands under her ass and lifted her up high enough for me to bend her over and run my tongue up the center of her pussy. "So wet," I groaned. "I can't get enough of your sweet juices, kitten." "More," Audrey moaned. "Please, Merrick." Fuck. Hearing her say my name in that breathy, passion-filled tone, begging me to eat her, I almost spilled in my pants like a horny teenager. "Anything you want," I murmured honestly, before I made a meal out of her drenched pussy. I settled her legs over my shoulders and ate like a starving man. When she was writhing in sweet agony, humping my mouth, and crying out for release, I paused. "Who do you belong to, Audrey?" "Who?" Her pale green eyes locked onto my face, and some of the daze cleared as she took in my determined expression. "Say it, kitten," I demanded. "Tell me who you belong to." "Now?" she yelled. "If you want to come, baby, all you have to do is say you're mine." She scrunched up her nose in annoyance, but dropped her head back with a moan when I slowly circled her clit with my tongue before sucking it into my mouth. When I let it pop from between my lips, I growled, "Who do you belong to, Audrey? I won't ask again. I suggest you remember what happened last time you didn't do as you were told." Her ass wiggled a little, and I smirked at the spark of desire that mixed with her attitude. "You," she whispered. "I'm sorry. Did you say something?" "You," she said a little louder this time. "What?" She let out an adorable little growl before shouting, "You! I belong to you, you big sexy jerk!" My cocky little smile turned into a full-blown grin at her outburst. "And who owns this pussy?" "You, darn it!" I didn't reward her verbally. I just buried my head between her legs and attacked her, sending her flying over the edge in moments. Her scream of rapture had me leaking from my dick, and it was pushing so hard against the zipper of my jeans. I was shocked it hadn't broken in its effort to get to Audrey. Carefully, but hastily, I lowered the zipper and freed my cock. Then I removed Audrey's legs from my shoulders and let them dangle off the counter, pushing them as wide as they would go. I stared at her pink, swollen center, glistening with arousal and begging to be filled. I pulled her closer until her ass was hanging mostly off the ledge. Then I lined up my cock with her tight hole. Grabbing her torso, I brought her up into a sitting position as I punched my hips forward. She pitched toward me and practically fell onto my shaft. "Fuck!" I roared as I went deep enough to bump her cervix. "You're holding me so tight, kitten. Fuck." I braced my hands on the island on either side of her and began to pump my hips up. With the way she was positioned, she was basically falling off the edge and onto my cock every time I retreated, making it easier to drive in completely each time. "Oh, fuck, Audrey," I groaned as she squeezed her inner muscles around me. "So good, kitten. Fuck, yeah. Fuck. Merrick, she cried when I shifted to make sure I hit just the right spot each time. Oh, yes. Oh, harder. Yes. Come, Audrey, I demanded, knowing I wouldn't last much longer. Come on my cock, baby. Take it all, everything I've got. Milk my dick until there's nothing left. Her walls began to flutter, and she screamed my name as she exploded. Her pussy clamped down so tight it was strangling my cock, but he didn't give any more fucks than I did. It felt too unbelievably amazing to care, because if this was the way I died, I'd spend eternity in bliss. I pounded into her a few more times. Then I bellowed in ecstasy as my climax hit me like a concrete wall. Pleasure streaked through my body, leaving a sizzling path behind in its wake. I shuddered violently as I shot hot cum inside Audrey. It filled her up until it was dripping down her legs. Finally, I felt as though the earth stopped moving beneath my feet, and I buried my face in the crook of Audrey's neck. Every time, I think it's the best it will get, and then you prove me wrong. She giggled a little, and it caused her walls to squeeze my barely softened cock. We both moaned when I twitched inside her overstimulated pussy. I wrapped her legs around my waist and her arms around my neck. "Hold on, kitten," I instructed as I held her under the ass. Seconds later, I fell onto the bed, leaving my cock buried inside her hot, wet sex. Audrey yawned and flopped her head onto my chest, then lifted it to glare at me. I laughed as I yanked my shirt off. Then I reluctantly pulled out of her so I could remove my jeans and shuck them off me. After which, I promptly popped her back onto my dick and guided her head down so she was splayed over my body. I rubbed soft circles on her back, and it wasn't a minute later that her steady breathing told me she'd fallen asleep. My phone vibrated in my jeans, and I frowned in irritation. I considered ignoring it, but I wouldn't put it past Rogue to show up at my fucking door if it was him and I didn't answer. Once again, I reluctantly extricated myself from Audrey, silently cursing whoever was on the phone to the very depths of hell. I dug it out of the pocket and saw the code that I used to store the number for Ruthless Corp in my phone. Scowling, I yanked on my jeans and stalked down to my office. The call ended before I could get there, but my phone immediately started buzzing again. I swiped to answer as I dropped into my desk chair and put it to my ear. "What?" I growled. "Do you want to explain to me why you haven't answered my email?" Rogue snarled right back. Shit, I hadn't checked my phone since I grabbed Audrey at the church, but a quick glance at the timestamp on the email showed that he'd only sent it a couple of hours ago. "I know you'll find this hard to believe, Rogue," I said dryly, "but I don't sit around waiting for your call like a lovesick schoolgirl." "This one is time-sensitive, Merrick," he snapped, ignoring my jab. So that was why he had called instead of just sending me another email. "Word has it that the target I assigned you is involved in a bank robbery right now. If you take him out, we won't have as big a mess to clean up." I thought about explaining the situation with Audrey to him and taking the chance of asking him to assign another operative. But Rogue was as ruthless as the name of his company suggested. If that man had a heart, it had been cut out long ago. In his own way, his people were under his care. But that didn't mean he had sympathy for people who let themselves be vulnerable by something such as love. Then again, what the fuck did I know? He could have his own woman and children stashed away in a warehouse somewhere. Still, I wasn't ready to share Audrey, especially with my boss. "Tell me what's happening now." He laid out the details of the bank robbery, ending with the fact the man I was hunting had taken a hostage and gone on the run. Fucking hell. I would have to figure out a way to handle this motherfucker and Audrey at the same time. "I'll take care of it," I murmured. Rogue grunted, but didn't say anything else before he hung up. "Goodbye to you too, asshole." I turned back to my computer and looked up the bank where the robbery was happening. There were plenty of street cams and businesses with security feeds for me to hack into. I did a facial recognition scan, and it wasn't long before it dinged, and I caught sight of Jack. He and an accomplice were dragging a woman out to a van at gunpoint. From there, I followed them out into the open road. I nearly lost them when they played a shell game with a bunch of other matching vehicles. However, I was damn good at my job, and they couldn't shake me. At one point, the van pulled to the side of the road, and the passenger door opened right before the accomplice went tumbling out head first. Then the van took off again, and I stayed on at 6, not giving the man left behind more than a passing thought. My gut told me he was dead. Eventually, the van had traveled down enough back roads that I had to switch to satellite feed. Yeah, Ruthless Corp had all the coolest toys. When the van finally squealed into a parking lot behind a large warehouse, I kept one eye on the satellite image of him while I searched the address. It didn't take me long to find the schematics for the building. Jack had dragged the woman inside, and I furrowed my brow as I considered my options. I wasn't close enough to help her, but leaving her to the mercy of that fuck wasn't a choice either. Another vehicle suddenly rolled to a stop a ways down the road. I was shocked when I realized I recognized the SUV. Huntley. My former teammate lived in the town where the robbery had taken place, and pieces of conversations from over the last year and a half began to replay in my mind. Something about a bank teller. He'd been just cagey enough for me to suspect there was more to his relationship with her than he was letting on. Did that asshole have Huntley's woman? An idea began to form in my head. This just might work. I picked up my phone and chose another encoded number before I hit send. "Can this wait?" Huntley barked in lieu of a greeting. "I think you're going to want to hear what I have to say before you go into that warehouse with guns blazing," I drawled. There was a moment of tense silence, so I quickly made my point. "This is a you help me, I'll help you kind of call." "Details," he demanded impatiently.
Chapter 8. Audrey. Both times Merrick and I had sex, I'd wound up passing out afterward. Mind-blowing orgasms were apparently better than sleep meds, at least for me. But not for my kidnapping hottie, since he hadn't stayed in bed with me while I was sleeping once again. Grumbling to myself, I crawled off the mattress and snagged one of his white button-down shirts from the closet. Striving to look as tempting as possible, I only slid a couple of the buttons into place and didn't bother with panties. After a pit stop to the bathroom, I padded out of the bedroom in search of the man who'd screwed me into a coma. I was filled with a burning need to make him regret leaving me alone in his bed. Although I hadn't given him nearly as much grief over kidnapping me as I should have, I wasn't a pushover. It was about time Merrick learned that about me, and teaching him by using my newfound feminine wiles sounded like a whole lot of fun. As I moved through his lair, I was still in awe of the comfortable home he'd built inside of what looked like a derelict building from the outside. He'd waved off my admiration earlier with an offhand comment about how that was his goal with the warehouse, but his modesty didn't lessen the impact of my surroundings. I'd grown up in the lap of luxury, but found myself impressed anyway. I paused a few times to appreciate Merrick's choice in artwork, and was staring up at what I was almost certain was an original Jackson Pollock painting worth millions, when the deep murmur of his voice drifted down the hallway. I headed in that direction, but paused as I neared his office. Merrick had said the room was off-limits for my exploration of the place, but the door wasn't closed all the way, and he was in there, so I figured the rule didn't apply under these circumstances.
"The man you're hunting, Jack Carlson, he's one of my targets. I've got my hands full with an unexpected situation."
Nudging the door open the rest of the way, I traced my finger down the gaping neckline of the shirt I was wearing. Although he was on the phone, Merrick spotted me right away and shook his head, his eyes sharp with warning. When his dark gaze locked on me, I whispered, "If you'd stayed in that big bed of yours until I woke up, then I could have told you about the sexy dream I had. Maybe we would have even turned it into reality." He glared at me as I popped open the first button. Merrick covered the receiver so the person on the other end of the line couldn't hear him.
"You're going to earn yourself another spanking, Audrey," he growled. "Now be a good little girl and behave."
A shiver raced up my spine as I remembered the sting of his palm against my butt cheeks and how wet I'd gotten. I was giving serious thought to being naughty when he lifted his hand from the receiver and continued his conversation without looking away from me.
"I'm going to send you the warehouse blueprints. Take 'em out for me and I'll owe you."
I was captivated by the sensual gleam in his dark orbs as he scanned me from head to toe, his tongue sweeping out to wet his bottom lip. I couldn't help but wonder if he was remembering what I tasted like. My nipples pebbled, pushing against the soft material covering them, and if I'd been wearing panties, they would have been drenched.
"It'll make us square then."
Merrick paused for a moment, presumably to listen to what the other person was saying.
"You'll have the plans in 30 seconds. Send proof that it's done from my employer. Just keep everyone out of the fucking picture so no one realizes it wasn't me who did the job."
His fingers tapped quickly against his keyboard as he murmured,
"Hoo-yah."
It wasn't until Merrick stood and started to prowl toward me that everything I just heard finally registered in my brain. Shaking off the sensual fog that wrapped around me whenever he was near, I held my hands up and took a step back. I could tell by how his hands clenched at his sides and a muscle jumped in his jaw that he didn't like it, but Merrick gave in to my nonverbal request and abruptly stopped. A million thoughts whirled around my head, and there were plenty of difficult questions I needed to ask. Things I couldn't ignore just because I was falling head over heels for the man who'd stolen me from my best friend's wedding. I believed Merrick when he said that I was safer with him, but I needed more than vague answers if I was really going to give him my heart along with my body. To get the ball rolling on the conversation that could change the direction of my life, I decided to go with the easiest question first. Hoo-yah is a military thing, right? Were you a soldier?
"Not a soldier, a sailor."
He sighed when my brow wrinkled in confusion since I didn't understand the difference.
"When you're in the Navy, no matter what your rating is, you're a sailor."
He hadn't really given much away with his answer, and the lack of information frustrated me. You can't keep secrets from me forever, not if you want whatever this thing is between us to work.
"You're my woman. That's what's between us."
He prowled toward me, and my heart raced at the predatory gleam in his dark eyes. When I tried to back up again, he wrapped his fingers around my wrist and yanked me against his chest.
"And that's never going to fucking change, Audrey."
I slapped my free hand against his chest. "Then you'd better learn how to share stuff with me, big guy."
"Damn it,"
he groaned, dropping his forehead against mine as he sighed.
"I hear what you're saying, kitten. I'm used to keeping shit close to my chest, and I don't like the idea of tainting you with the darkness and the secrets I keep. But I'll share what I can if that's what you need."
I felt the weight of his offer deep in my soul, butterflies taking flight in my belly as I began to have hope that this talk would go better than I expected. "What did you do in the Navy?"
"I served on the teams as a SEAL, based out of Coronado."
He led me toward a black leather couch and pulled me onto his lap after he sat down, my butt on his thighs and my legs stretched out on the cushions. His fingers toyed with the ends of my hair as he went into more detail.
I would have been happy to serve in the Navy for 20 years and retire with my pension. But my team was betrayed after our last mission a few years ago. Our identities are always supposed to be protected, which is why we can't share specific details with anyone outside the unit. When we were running a black op with top-secret clearance, a list of people who were in the loop was short as fuck. When our names were leaked to a terrorist organization out for revenge, only so many people could have given them the information. While the members of my team scrambled to get their families safe, I started hunting down the bastard who betrayed us.
Thinking about how easily things could have gone wrong and Merrick could have been killed, I had to swallow down the lump in my throat before I could speak. Did you find him? His arms tightened around me as he answered.
Yes. And then I did what I'd been trained to do. Eliminate the threat.
Maybe it made me a bad person, but I couldn't feel bad about the death of someone who'd put money above the lives of the men he served with and their innocent families. They would have been responsible for Merrick's death if things had gone down differently. But I did worry about what had happened to him. Did anyone find out what you did?
Fuck no. The military had trained me too well. The identity of that bastard's killer still remains a mystery to this day.
His deep chuckle didn't hold much humor.
Not that the NCIS team assigned to the case looked into his death too closely. The top brass assumed he was connected to the leak and didn't want the whole clusterfuck to become public. So they buried that shit deep and didn't ask questions when I didn't re-up. I received an honorable discharge instead of a court-martial, and the Navy got to keep their dirty little secret.
I'm sorry you were put in the position of having to make that decision. I was glad that he wasn't rotting in a military prison for what he'd done, but I was also a little pissed that he'd had to give up his military career because of someone else's greed. What happened after you left the Navy? His hand slid up my back to wrap around the back of my neck, collaring me in place.
I crossed a line that I couldn't ever come back from when I pulled that trigger, which made it easier for me to accept a position with an outfit who had use for the unique skill set I learned while serving.
Merrick was surrounded by mystery, but some of the puzzle pieces were falling into place now that he was opening up to me. But I still couldn't see the whole picture and felt as though I was missing something major, like what he'd been doing in Stacy's room the day we met. Did Jonah hire you?
Chapter 9. Merrick. Yes, I'd answered quietly. I'd promised not to lie, but I wasn't sure she was ready to hear the entire truth. When I didn't expound on my answer, her brow puckered, and she canted her head to the side. Why would he do that? Jonah has his own guys all over the world, especially New York. Using them would risk the job being traced back to him. She pressed her lips into a thin line and narrowed her eyes. He didn't want people to know he was looking into Stacy's disappearance? I sighed and let her go, with the exception of her hand. Holding it tight in mine, I led her out to the living room and sat on one of the large, comfortable couches. With one quick, hard tug, she tumbled into my lap, and I shifted her body until she was straddling me. Then I wrapped her in my arms in case she tried to get away. I wasn't hired to find your friend, kitten. That wasn't the job. Looking into that was strictly a favor from my employer to Jonah. What was the job? I held my breath for a moment, knowing this information would decide the course of our lives and possibly change how she looked at me. I wasn't ashamed of my choices in life. This was me, and I didn't have any qualms over that. But she might, and if she couldn't handle it, I wasn't sure I had the strength to let her go. Barrington, I finally murmured. She chewed on her bottom lip for a minute, and I could practically see the cogs turning in her mind through her beautiful green eyes. Paul Barrington. I nodded. He's dead now. Another nod. I knew the exact moment she put it all together. Merrick, are you a contract killer? I prefer the label Hitman, I tried to tease with a strained smile. Her eyes widened and filled with fear. Shit. I have rules, though, I assured her. The only targets I'll agree to kill deserve to be thrown into hell. They're bad, bad people, kitten. But, you could, she sputtered, struggling to find the right combination of words. The fear hadn't dissipated in the least after my explanation, and she began to struggle in an attempt to escape my arms. No fucking way was I letting her go until we'd straightened this out. I'll never hurt you, Audrey, I said in a low tone while moving my head a fraction to meet her gaze. I know that, she retorted, rolling her eyes. Is it the fact that I kill other people that's making you afraid of me? I asked quietly. I'm not afraid of you, you big oaf, she yelled. I'm afraid for you. Her expression turned anxious, and she started wringing her hands together while I sat in stunned silence. What if you get hurt? What if someday the person you're after kills you first? I can't. We just found each other. I'm not the kind of woman who can handle the man I love just disappearing on me while the only thing I know for sure is that you're in danger. Her eyes rounded like saucers, and her mouth dropped open as she slapped her hands onto her cheeks. Good grief, we haven't been using protection. What if I'm pregnant? Then she grabbed a fistful of my shirt with each hand and shouted, I could be pregnant! After I managed to break out of my stupor, I placed a hand over Audrey's mouth to stop her babbling. If you're not, then I'm gonna stuff you full of my cum until you are, I told her in a matter-of-fact voice. She tried to say something, but her words were muffled by my hand. Calm down, kitten, I ordered. She took a deep breath and tried to sit still, but her body still vibrated with anxious tension. I smiled in appreciation of her effort. Now, let's go back to the part where you called me the man you love. She gasped and stared at me in shock, beginning to shake her head. I slowly took my hand from her mouth and gave her a stern look. Don't deny it, Audrey, or I will blister your pretty little ass for lying to me. Her face flushed pink, making her freckles pop, which made my cock jump. Twin circles of crimson bloomed on her cheeks when she felt the movement. I loved how her freckles seemed to multiply when she blushed. My tongue itched to lick each one. Looking deeply into her eyes, I placed my hands on her hips to hold her in place while I ground the bulge in my pants against her sex. Tell me you love me, kitten, I demanded. She moaned, and I stopped, earning me a glare. Tell me. Then it occurred to me that I didn't want to force her love, even the confession of its existence. So I softened my voice and bargained, Tell me, so I can say it back. That had her sitting up straight and hope lighting her eyes. You love me? I smiled and winked at her. Tell me, and you'll find out. A beautiful smile split her face, and she threw her arms around my neck, hugging me tight. I love you, Merrick, she said sweetly into my ear. I put my hand on the back of her neck and gently pulled, letting her know I wanted her to lean back a little. When she did, I held her face between my palms. I love you more than anything in this world, Audrey, more than I thought was possible for my shriveled heart. The moment I saw you, and those sexy freckles, she glared at me, and I chuckled. You became mine. The sunshine in my darkness, the love of my life, and the only one who matters." Audrey's expression softened, and her eyes melted into a gorgeous shade of jade, but the tension hadn't completely left her body. She was still holding back a tiny amount. I instinctively knew what she needed to give me all of her. "I'm retiring, kitten." Her face brightened, but she tried to hide it. "I don't want you to be someone you're not. I love you the way you are, and if you want to keep doing what you're good at, first of all, staying in the job puts you and our children at risk, which is something I will never do," I said firmly. Then I brought our foreheads together and said tenderly, "You bring out the best version of me, Audrey. I want to be whatever you need. Your friend, your husband, the father of your children. And even though the likelihood of someone getting the drop on me is basically non-existent, I don't want to chance it. You need me here, so here is where I'll be." "I don't know what to say," she breathed. "Say you'll marry me," I promptly responded. Then I shrugged and muttered, "Not that you really have a choice." Audrey laughed, and the musical sound warmed my heart. I promised myself I would live the rest of my life hearing it every day. Maybe I do have a touch of Stockholm Syndrome," she chirped with a sly smile, "because I'm going to marry you, kidnapper." I grinned and leaned in to kiss her, but she took me by surprise and jumped out of my arms and off my lap. "That doesn't mean you won't have to catch me from time to time." Then she took off running. "You're just asking for a spanking," I yelled, stifling a laugh. My smile turned wicked as I gave her a minute head start. We both knew I'd catch her, and what would happen when I did. I'd keep her. Forever.
Epilogue. Audrey. I'd quickly learned that Merrick didn't waste any time once he'd made a decision. He knew he was going to kidnap me before he'd walked away from me the day we met, and less than a week later, he executed the perfect plan to steal me from the packed church during Grace's wedding. He wanted my heart, and it took less than a day for me to fall in love with him, even though he just kidnapped me. He wanted to make me his wife, and the day after he told me we were getting married, right after he called his boss and told him he resigned, we were on our way to Vegas to make it happen. A couple of weeks later, we found out that he'd already knocked me up just like he wanted. He was lucky I didn't hire a hit on him when I threw up in class more than a dozen times while wrapping up my semester before I moved out to L.A. with him. The one thing my husband couldn't control was when I gave birth to our son. At 6 days past my due date, I had a whole bunch of sympathy for elephants. They were the mammals with the longest gestation period at almost 2 whole years. I'd researched that little tidbit in an attempt to cheer myself up, but my overactive hormones had just made me cry for all female elephants because I couldn't imagine being pregnant that long, even if it felt as though I was nearing that point sometimes. Like now, as 2 macho guys stared at me with fear in their eyes. "Stop looking at me as though you think I'm going to break any minute."
"Not break, just go into labor,"
Merrick growled, his gaze drifting down to where I was rubbing my rounded belly. "I wish." I glanced at Deacon, who'd come down for a visit while he was on leave from the Navy, and whispered, "We've tried every single thing the doctor recommended at my last appointment, and nothing has happened yet." I'd only met Deacon a few times, but I should have known that I couldn't slip anything past a seal. Tilting his head to the side, he asked,
"What kinds of things have you tried?" "The doctor had some great suggestions."
Merrick's eyes took on a roguish gleam as my cheeks filled with heat. He flashed me a sexy smirk, and his dimples popped in his cheeks.
"My favorites were—"
Luckily, he was sitting next to me, so I could slap my palm over his mouth while he talked about how we'd tried sex and nipple stimulation to kickstart labor. I kept my hand there as I explained, spicy foods, fresh pineapple, and exercise.
"Exercise?"
He grinned at Merrick.
Is that what they're calling it now?
Merrick nipped at my fingers, and I yanked my hand away with a yelp while a shiver raced down my spine. Then he arched his brow and quipped,
Well, all 3 letters are in there, so I guess it's close enough.
It took me a moment to unscramble the letters and exercise and realize he'd pulled out one of the E's, the X, and the S to spell out sex. I pushed away from the table to stand and murmured, Well played. Merrick's dark gaze swept down my body, his eyes going wide when I cried out as liquid gushed down my legs.
Holy fuck! Your water broke!
He jumped to his feet, sweeping me up into his arms to carry me out to the car. Deacon followed us, and when Merrick's hand slipped trying to put the seatbelt on me, for the 3rd time, he shoved him out of the way. After helping me, he stood and slammed the door shut. Merrick was standing there staring at me, so Deacon cuffed him on the head and said, Move your ass, sailor. Merrick broke out of his daze when I grasped my stomach and groaned as a contraction hit. He raced to the other side of the car and jabbed the key at the door. He obviously missed because Deacon cursed as he came up beside him. He snatched the keys and pushed Merrick toward the back door.
I'll drive,
he sighed, getting into the driver's seat while Merrick climbed in the back with me. He held my hand as another contraction hit, and I cried out.
How do I always end up being the one to drive to the hospital when one of your women has a baby?
Deacon muttered as he pulled the car out of the driveway. When the pain passed, I panted, What do you mean?
Skip the story and focus on the road, jackass, Merrick growled.
I dug my fingers into his arm. Don't make him stop. The story will help distract me from the pain.
Don't worry, Audrey. Your husband may be a badass, but so am I. He can't make me stop talking until I'm done, Deacon assured, smirking at us through the rearview mirror. Wrong. I could shut your mouth if I really wanted.
Merrick stroked his palm over my belly.
But lucky for you, Audrey wants to hear what you have to say, so I'm not forced to demonstrate exactly how I do it.
Deacon deftly worked his way through traffic, following Merrick's directions for the quickest route while telling me about how badly one of the other SEAL guys, Huntley, had done when his wife had delivered their first baby. My laughter over hearing how he'd passed out drifted into a groan when the strongest contraction yet hit me. Merrick glanced at the Petite Philippe watch strapped to his wrist.
They're coming too close together. Drive faster.
Fuck, Deacon hissed.
LA traffic doesn't exactly make it easy to pick up speed, Shadow. Figure it out, man. I don't want my wife giving birth to our first child in this car, Merrick growled.
I rolled my eyes and sighed. No way in heck am I having Cohen back here when we're only a couple of miles from the hospital. I was starting to doubt if we'd make it as my contractions started to last longer, and I cried out in relief when we finally pulled up in front of the hospital. Merrick jumped out of the car and grabbed a wheelchair before lifting me out. As soon as he shut the door behind us, the tires squealed as Deacon pulled away from the curb. Merrick got me settled and rolled me into the hospital, pausing near the doors to hold my hand when another contraction hit. Then he yelled, "We need help over here," when we got inside. A nurse came running over, taking my wrist to check my pulse as she kneeled in front of me and asked for my details. I panted through another contraction while Merrick finished the rundown of how far along I was, the timing of the contractions, and told her about my water breaking and that our doctor was already on the way since he'd called her from the car. I wasn't sure how Deacon had managed to park the car so quickly, but I heard him call out to us as the nurse, whose name was Piper according to her name tag, got to her feet. I recognized the dazed expression on her face. It was the same one I had when I'd first met Merrick. Glancing over my shoulder at Deacon, I saw that his attention was totally focused on her, too. Rubbing my palms together, I murmured, "This is going to be fun." My comment drew Piper's attention away from me. Her eyes widened as she echoed, "This is going to be fun? I don't think I've ever had a patient describe giving birth quite like that before. Usually they're asking how quickly we can get them an epidural once the contractions are as close together as yours are." Merrick rounded the wheelchair and nudged Piper out of the way, worry shining from his dark eyes.
"Do you need meds, kitten? Because I'll make sure they give them to you now if you're in too much pain."
I had no doubt that my husband could scare the medical staff into doing whatever he wanted, but I didn't need the security team to pace the hallway outside my room the entire time we were here because they thought he posed a risk. Patting his hand, I plastered a smile on my face and muttered, "I'm sure I'll be fine until we get to the birthing suite, which is where I'll take you right now." Piper eyed Deacon up and down before she moved to the back of the wheelchair to push me toward the elevator. Bending toward my ear, she whispered, "Who's hottie number 2? I felt her startle behind me when Deacon answered,
"A friend of the family."
"Like I said," I whispered back, even though I knew both men would be able to hear me. "This is going to be fun." Watching Deacon and Piper circle each other helped to pass all of the hours before it was time for me to push. Knowing that one of my husband's SEAL brothers found their woman as our first son was being born would also make for one heck of a story later on.
Epilogue. Merrick. I set my beer down on the patio table and looked around at my former teammates and their families. We did this a few times a year, all of us congregating at one of our houses for a barbecue or some other cliché family activity. Considering our backgrounds, I couldn't help but laugh my ass off when Huntley's youngest daughter dragged him into a bounce house, until they caught me with a tiara on my head while I tried to convince my daughter to go on the potty. It baffled me that this same little girl had just turned 16 and was upstairs getting ready for prom and her first date. A date? How Audrey talked me into letting any of my daughters go to a co-ed private school was... Well, I knew exactly how it happened, with her sexy little mouth wrapped around my cock. But a blowjob, albeit a fucking spectacular one, wasn't enough to talk me into a date, and she knew it. Which is why she'd arranged it behind my back. Better to ask forgiveness and all that shit. When she and Lana told me this morning, I'd gone ballistic. Until my little girl turned on the waterworks, and my wife looked at me like I was the big bad fucking wolf. I'd made a deal with her. He would pick Lana up here, and I'd get to meet him first. Then our daughter would text me when she arrived and when she left, and was to be home by 11 sharp. I wanted to play chauffeur and keep an eye on the punk, but Audrey had already made arrangements for his parents to drive them. While Lana threw her arms around me and screamed her thanks, I glared at my wife, silently warning her that she was in for a fuck ton of trouble. She just smiled and wiggled her ass a little more as they strolled out of the room. A smirk kicked up the corners of my mouth as I thought about how I would punish her tonight. Our oldest, Cohen, was home on leave from the Navy, but he'd agreed to help with the rest of the kids who were going to be camping in Cash's backyard, which meant we'd have the house to ourselves. "Dad?" Cohen called, sticking his head around a sliding glass door. "He's here." I whistled and made a roundup gesture. A few sailors, a couple of soldiers, an airman, and even a spook all immediately headed my way. As usual, we were all packing, but we might have stepped it up a little tonight. Cohen was waiting in the hallway, and I lifted my chin to let him know he could answer the door while I stood a few feet behind him. The rest of the men scattered around the living room, looking as intimidating as possible. The bell rang, and Cohen swung open the door to a tall, blond teenage boy. He looked clean-cut and innocent, but I knew exactly what went on in the mind of boys his age. The idea of my sweet little girl starring in his dreams nearly caused me to throw the kid in the yard and slam the door. However, memories of Lana's tears kept me from barring him from the house. "Attention!" Cohen shouted, scaring the shit out of the kid and almost making me laugh. My oldest child was standing in his uniform at his tallest height and glaring down at Lana's date, who already looked ready to run, If this wimp couldn't take a little intimidation, he wasn't good enough for my daughter. No one was. But Audrey had convinced me that I'd have to settle for someone someday. I didn't know why the fuck my little girls couldn't just stay single. But as I looked at the little pipsqueak here to pick up Lana, it was another reminder that I'd lost the fight. "At ease, sailor," I said gruffly, putting just enough of a smile on my face to make the kid think I was his ally. "You must be Jefferson," I greeted. He looked relieved at my mild tone, and after throwing another furtive glance at Cohen, he took a step toward me. "Yeah, He cleared his throat and shifted his weight to his other foot. "Yes?" "Yes, sir," Cohen snarled in his ear, making the kid jump a foot. It was hard not to laugh.
Every story deserves a peaceful pause. Enjoy this relaxing music, breathe calmly, and return to your audiobook with a smile.
To win this fight, 'cause the end's in sight now. Whoa, whoa, whoa. To burden, to greater me. Ooh, you think that I'm playing the fool? Honey, I'm old. I wish you hadn't. I won't be back now.
But I managed it. "I'm Merrick, Lana's dad. Why don't you come in and we can get to know each other while she finishes getting ready?" He nodded nervously and wiped his palms on his suit pants. Okay," Cohen growled. "Okay, sir," Jefferson quickly amended. I walked into the living room, and since he was behind me, I gave myself permission to grin when I heard him stop breathing at the sight of all the muscle in the room. "Hoo-yah, boys." "Don't mind them, Jefferson," I said in a conversational tone. "They won't hurt you unless I tell them to." Cash cracked a smile, but considering he was built like a fucking tank and usually looked like he was 2 seconds away from killing someone, it didn't take away from the intimidation factor. We had to walk through the men to get to the back hallway, where I led him into my office. "Have a seat, Jefferson," I said, as I rounded my desk and lowered my large frame into the chair. As planned, Jefferson's eyes swept over the right wall, which displayed my gun collection, and then the left, which displayed my knife collection. He finally sat down and looked toward me, but his attention almost immediately dropped to the desktop. "Do you know what this is?" I asked. "A gun?" he squeaked. I frowned, and he suddenly seemed to realize that I wasn't his friend. "Nope." "That's like saying you're a person," I grunted. Picking up the weapon, I looked at it fondly. "This is a Glock 19, favored by Navy SEALs." I set it back on the desk before the kid peed his pants. "Do you know what else?" He shook his head jerkily. No, sir." I pinned him with a deadly glare. "It's the gun I'll use on you if you hurt my daughter. Do you understand?" "Yes." "Yes, sir," Cohen snapped from right behind the kid. Jefferson jumped so hard the chair would have tipped backward if Cohen hadn't caught it and said it right. "Yes, sir." I stood and placed my palms on the desk, leaning forward so I looked down at the boy. "If you say or do anything inappropriate, I'll know. And," I paused for dramatic effect because this was way too much fun, "they'll never find your body." All the blood drained from his face, and I deepened my scowl to keep from laughing. "Do you know why?" Jefferson shook his head. Cohen leaned down and growled directly into his face. "Because he's that fucking good." Audrey was waiting for me when I walked into our bedroom with her hands on her hips and a murderous expression on her beautiful face. She was so cute when she got riled up, especially because it made her freckles stand out, which always made me want to lick her like a lollipop. But I was still pissed at being tricked into letting that little shit anywhere near my baby girl. "Merrick Ashford, what the heck did you say to that poor boy? He wouldn't even meet my eyes." Lana was mortified. "Get on the bed, kitten," I growled, my tone deadly as I stalked to the closet, ignoring her outrage. I grabbed what I needed, and when I entered the bedroom again, she was still standing there glaring at me. "On the bed, Audrey," I ordered as I prowled toward her. She opened her mouth to argue, but something in my eyes must have made it clear that I wasn't playing, especially when she spotted the silk ties in my hands, and not the ones we sometimes used for fun. I saved these for special occasions, the ones where my wife had earned herself an ass so red she spent a week remembering how she earned her spanking. But Merrick," her protest turned into a shriek when I grabbed the front of her shirt and tore it down the middle. I tossed the restraints on the bed and pushed her shirt off, then popped the front clasp on her bra and took it off, too. Her skirt went next, and when I saw her bare, glistening pussy, I sighed. "You're pushing your luck, kitten," I grunted. Shortly after we were married, we'd been out on our back deck, and when she stood, a gust of wind lifted her skirts so high I could see she wasn't wearing underwear. From that moment on, I forbid her to ever go commando unless it was inside our home. I closed my eyes and counted to 10, trying to calm my rage at the thought of one of my buddies seeing what was meant for my eyes only. "I don't know." Audrey was trying to look innocent, but I wasn't in the mood. "Get your ass on the bed and in the air, wife," I barked. Audrey spun around and scrambled up onto our bed, positioning herself on all fours. Fuck, she looked so damn sexy like that. Her big tits swayed as she moved, and my mouth watered. Later, I promised myself. I secured each of Audrey's wrists to a bedpost before going to the end and stripping off my clothes while I stared at her juicy ass. "You were a very bad kitten today," I said as I climbed onto the bed and knelt behind her. "You lied to me, Audrey." She gasped. "I did not." I slapped one cheek hard enough to leave a print for a moment before the red faded into milky white, freckled skin. Omission, kitten, is still a lie. But I spanked her other cheek, and she cried out in pain and pleasure. I drew the tip of my finger up her slit and groaned when it came away covered in her cream. After licking the digit clean, I spanked each cheek twice more. You manipulated me. Smack. Used my daughter against me. Smack. Forced me to let that shit take my baby girl out. Smack. Smack. You've earned yourself a blistered ass for the next month, kitten. Merrick, she moaned. But I'm just going to punish you tonight if you take it like a good little pussycat. Am I clear? Yes. I spanked her repeatedly, stopping every once in a while to play with her tight little pussy until she was nearing the edge of climax. Then I'd back off until it ebbed, spanking her a little more, and do it again. Merrick, please, she begged. I need to come. Have you learned your lesson, kitten? She hesitated, and I growled. If you aren't 100% honest with me, Audrey, I'm going to spend all night loving on your body, coming on you, in you, and I won't let you climax once. She gasped. You wouldn't. Now, we both know that's not true, I drawled. Fine, I learned my lesson. No more keeping things from you. Good girl, I praised. But I hadn't finished yet. Her ass was pink, but it wasn't red enough that I knew she'd be smarting every time she sat for a few days. I'm going to let you come as soon as I've finished your punishment, kitten, I murmured. By the time I was satisfied with the shade of her ass cheeks, Audrey was out of her mind with need. Her pussy was flooded, and it ran down her thighs. Her breathing was choppy, and her skin damp from sweat. I cupped her sex and shoved my middle finger into her hole. She clamped down on it, and I marveled that even after all these years, she was virgin tight. Fucking my wife was as close to heaven as I would ever get. I'd intended to finger her to orgasm before taking her on my cock, but I was about ready to blow. Moving on my knees until I was close enough for my dick to slide between her legs, I coated it with her juices. Then I slowly pushed inside her, groaning at the way she was practically strangling my long, thick cock. Fuck, yeah, I grunted. You feel so good, kitten. I glided my palms up her torso and around to cup her tits as I slid in deeper and deeper. Merrick, she moaned, bowing her back so my hands were spilling over with her tits and wiggling her ass in an attempt to drive me out of my mind so I would lose control. Knock it off, Audrey, I commanded. She whined, but stopped pushing her ass into my groin. I rewarded her by twisting and plucking her nipples while I seated myself fully inside her. I loved the way her pussy clenched around my cock whenever I pinched a hard peak. Please, Merrick, she begged softly. That was always my undoing. I fucked her hard and fast until we were both shouting with release. Then I flipped her onto her back to do it all over again. The next day, when we sat down to breakfast, she winced as she climbed onto one of the tall chairs at the bar. I smirked, and she glared at me. You earned it, Audrey, I said, as I turned to the stove to scramble our eggs. She huffed, but didn't deny it. When I set a plate of food in front of her, she muttered, If you like seeing your handprint on my ass so much, why don't I just have it tattooed there? Then it would only sting once. I laughed, having heard this many times over the years. Because I'd have to kill whoever had their eyes and hands on my wife's body, and I promised to be done with that life. She grumbled good-naturedly until she shifted and winced again. Stop smirking. I sat down next to her and moved her onto my lap. I love you more than anything, Audrey Ashford, I mumbled as I buried my face into the crook of her neck. She sighed and melted into me. I love you too, sailor. Forever.
Extra epilogue. Audrey. You're sure you'll be okay on your own with them today? My husband was capable of single-handedly toppling a dictatorship if he was so inclined, but that didn't stop me from worrying about leaving him home alone with a preschooler and an infant.
Relax.
Merrick flashed me a sexy grin, his dimples popping in his cheeks.
I proved yet again how easily I can handle a wildcat like you just last night. Our children will be easier to contend with.
A delicious shiver raced up my spine at the memory of how he held my wrists against my lower back while he bent me over the edge of our mattress and took me from behind. Although our bedroom was soundproofed, one of the first renovation projects Merrick had done after we bought our house, I'd buried my face in the comforter to muffle my moans each of the 3 times he'd driven me over the edge. After we'd been interrupted by Lana's cries around midnight the night before when Merrick was balls deep inside me, the last thing I'd wanted was to wake up Cohen or Lana before we were done. But my sexy husband had made it impossible for me to keep quiet with his relentless quest for my orgasms. Not that I was ever going to complain about his dedication to making me come. You didn't think Cohen was easy when you found him covered in baby powder the other day.
I definitely learned my lesson there.
He chuckled and shook his head.
I'll go hunting for him if things get too quiet around here while you're gone.
I was incredibly grateful that Merrick's travel security consultant business, he specialized in teaching safe travel practices to journalists and business people, allowed him to mostly work from home since the kids could be a handful at times. Lana was only 6 months old, but had recently figured out how to crawl backward after rocking back and forth on her hands and knees for the past month or so. She couldn't move forward yet, but that didn't stop her from getting to where she wanted to be, which was usually wherever her older brother was. Cohen needed to be watched closely, because he had a tendency to get into everything. At 4 years old, his curiosity was endless and often led to many disasters, like when he tried to figure out how the baby powder came out of the bottle. He kept squeezing the sides while peering into the tiny holes at the top until he was covered in white from head to toe, all without making a sound. The only time he was quiet was when he was getting into mischief. You probably shouldn't let him get too far away in the first place. Merrick wrapped his fingers around my wrist and yanked me against his chest.
Don't worry, kitten. I've got this.
I know. I heaved a deep sigh and stroked my cheek against his shirt. It's just weird to be heading out for the day when I'm used to spending my time with you guys.
As much as I hate to let you out of my sight.
I snorted and rolled my eyes, earning myself a light swat against my butt.
You've been looking forward to your girl time with Grace for months. Go have fun with your best friend. We'll be here when you come home.
Fine, I huffed before flashing him a grin. But don't hesitate to call if you need me.
You're going to earn yourself a spanking tonight if you keep on doubting my ability to watch over our kids while you're gone,
he growled. My smile widened as I wagged my brows. Quit threatening me with a good time. Merrick's dark gaze darted toward the clock on the microwave before he groaned.
Damn, I wish Cohen wasn't going to be up any minute.
Me too. I patted him on the cheek before stepping back. But I'll be looking forward to that spanking later. By the time I returned home, I'd been pampered within an inch of my life. Facials, massages, mani-pedis, the sauna. Grace and I did them all while drinking champagne and gossiping about our husbands. We talked about everything from our amazing sex lives to how they were faring without us today. I'd about fallen over when she told me that Hudson took their kids to Disneyland all by himself. But then she explained that he'd booked the VIP tour and upgraded to 3 guides, even though each one was supposed to cover up to 10 guests. With no lines, priority access to shows, and that many people at Hudson's beck and call, I could actually see their day going pretty smoothly. Being a billionaire had its perks, after all. I wasn't sure what I was expecting to find when I pulled into our driveway 8 hours later, but it wasn't to see Cohen's face pressed against the storm door while he stared outside. For someone who'd apparently been waiting for me to return, he didn't look happy to see me as I walked up the front steps. After I opened the door, Cohen planted his little fist on his hips and glared up at me with dark eyes that were identical to his daddy's. "You left me, Mommy." "I had a play date with Auntie Grace today, remember?" "Without me?" His bottom lip jutted out, breaking my heart. Merrick strode toward us, leaning close to whisper,
I don't think he bought the playdate explanation. It took me hours to figure out that he was pissed because he assumed that since you go with him to his, he was going to be joining you two today.
"Oh!" I could totally see how our 4-year-old would have made that assumption. Bending low so I was eye to eye with him, I offered my son a soft smile. "I'm sorry you couldn't come with me today, buddy. Auntie Grace and I did a bunch of boring stuff at a spa where they had a ton of rules. No running around and playing." I wiggled my fingers in the air so he could see my manicure. Just nail polish, hairbrushes, and makeup. "Boring." Cohen shook off his irritation and gave me a quick hug before running in the other direction.
Damn,
Merrick grunted, shaking his head.
He gave me hell all day, asking me where you were and when you were going to be home every 10 minutes. And after all that, he forgave you in the blink of an eye.
I grinned up at him. "Because he loves his mommy."
Damn straight.
He claimed my mouth in a quick but deep kiss.
And so do I.
This concludes Loved by the Hitman by Fiona Davenport, narrated by Jack Callahan and Tieran Wilder, both members of SAG-AFTRA. Copyright 2021 by Fiona Davenport. This unabridged audiobook is published by arrangement with Fiona Davenport, care of SBR Media, and was produced in the year 2024 by Tantor Media Incorporated, a division of Recorded Books, which holds the copyright thereto. Please visit Tantor.com for more information on our growing library of unabridged audiobooks.